James Carter, 72, steps off a plane in Seattle, his weathered face tight with exhaustion, clutching a crumpled first-class ticket. Just minutes ago, flight attendant Laura Hensley ejected him from his seat, only to be fired mid-flight, in front of stunned passengers. What started as a trip to see his dying sister became a brutal clash of racial prejudice, but this is no victory. A bigger fight looms, threatening his family, his home, his life. How far will this spiral? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more gripping tales. James Carter stepped onto the bustling concourse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, his polished black cane tapping a steady rhythm against the tiled floor. At 72, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen the world shift beneath his feet and fought to hold his ground. His suit, a deep charcoal gray with a crisp white shirt, hugged his lean frame, the fabric slightly worn but meticulously pressed. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he adjusted his silver tie, his gnarled hands trembling just a touch from age. Today was special. After months of planning, he was flying first class to Seattle to see his sister, Eleanor, who lay in hospice care, her time slipping away like sand through an hourglass. His niece Maya had gifted him the ticket, a gesture that warmed his heart more than he could ever express. He'd spent his life as a civil rights lawyer, battling injustice in courtrooms across the South, and now, in retirement, this trip felt like a rare moment of peace. He moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning the gate numbers, his mind already picturing Eleanor's frail smile when he arrived. The gate for Flight 217 to Seattle buzzed with activity as James approached, his boarding pass tucked neatly in his jacket pocket. Passengers shuffled in line, some tapping impatiently at their phones, others juggling oversized carry-ons. The air smelled of stale coffee and jet fuel, a familiar mix that stirred a flicker of excitement in his chest. He handed his pass to the gate agent, a young woman with a bright smile who nodded warmly as she scanned it. "First class," she confirmed, directing him down the jetway with a wave. James stepped aboard, the cool air of the cabin washing over him as he made his way to seat 2A. The first-class section gleamed with plush leather seats, wide enough to stretch out in, a stark contrast to the cramped economy rows he'd endured for decades. He eased himself down, wincing slightly as his knees protested, then set his cane against the armrest. His fingers brushed the smooth cover of a worn paperback, a collection of Langston Hughes poems he'd brought to read on the flight. He adjusted his round reading glasses, the lenses catching the soft overhead light, and opened the book, savoring the quiet before takeoff. Around him, the cabin filled with the low hum of conversation. A businessman in a pinstripe suit barked into his phone about a merger. A woman in a silk scarf sipped champagne, her laughter sharp and fleeting. James paid them little mind, his thoughts drifting to Eleanor, to the stories they'd share when he reached her bedside. He turned a page, the paper crinkling under his touch, when a shadow fell across his lap. He glanced up, expecting a fellow passenger or a routine check, but instead met the steely gaze of Laura Hensley, the flight attendant assigned to first class. She stood at 5'8", her navy uniform crisp and tailored, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that accentuated the sharp lines of her face. At 38, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who thrived on control, her posture rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. She'd been with the airline for 15 years, climbing the ranks with a mix of charm and ruthlessness, but beneath her polished exterior simmered a quiet resentment, a belief that certain people didn't belong in spaces like this. Laura's eyes flicked over James, taking in his suit, his cane, the way his dark skin contrasted with the pale leather seat. Her smile, practiced and automatic for the other passengers, vanished as if someone had flipped a switch. She tilted her head, her brows knitting together in a faint frown, and took a step closer, her heels clicking against the carpeted floor. "Sir," she said, her voice firm but edged with something colder. "Can I see your boarding pass?" James blinked, caught off guard by the sudden demand. He set the book down, his movements slow and deliberate, and looked up at her through his glasses. "Of course," he replied, his tone calm, almost gentle, as he reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers found the folded paper, and he pulled it out, smoothing it flat before handing it over with a slight nod. He expected her to glance at it and move on, maybe offer a curt apology for the interruption. After all, he'd flown first class before, though not often, and knew the drill. But Laura didn't move on. She took the pass, her manicured nails, tapping against it, and studied it with a scrutiny that made his stomach tighten. She flipped the paper over, then back again, her lips pursing as if she'd found a riddle she couldn't solve. "This is a first-class ticket," she said slowly, her voice dropping an octave, her blue eyes narrowing as they lifted to meet his. "Yes," James nodded, keeping his composure despite the growing unease prickling at the back of his neck. "My niece got it for me as a gift." Laura let out a short, skeptical breath, almost a scoff, and tapped her fingers harder against the pass. Her gaze darted to his hands, rough and lined with age, then to the cane resting beside him, as if these details confirmed some unspoken suspicion. "Are you traveling alone?" she pressed, her tone sharpening. "Yes, I am," James answered, his voice steady but softer now, sensing the shift in her demeanor. A few passengers nearby lifted their heads, their conversations faltering as they caught the edge in her words. She handed the ticket back, her movements stiff, but didn't step away. "I just need to check something," she said abruptly. "Give me a moment." Without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heels and strode toward the front of the cabin, her stride brisk, her shoulders squared. James watched her go, his chest tightening as he exhaled slowly. He adjusted his suit jacket, sitting up straighter, trying to shake off the weight of her stare. It was a small moment, a brief exchange, but it gnawed at him. He'd felt this before, the way eyes lingered, the way voices hardened when people decided he didn't fit. Decades in courtrooms had taught him to recognize prejudice dressed up as procedure, and this felt too familiar. He glanced around, noticing the subtle shifts in the cabin. A woman 2 rows ahead whispered to her companion, her words too low to catch but her glance unmistakable. The businessman paused his call, his eyes flicking toward James before returning to his screen. The air felt thicker now, charged with something unspoken, and James clasped his hands over the book, his knuckles whitening slightly. He told himself it was nothing, that she'd come back with a nod and leave him be. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't over. Laura reached the galley, her jaw tight as she punched numbers into the in-flight phone. She'd seen passengers like him before, she thought. People who thought they could sneak into first class with a fake ticket or a sob story. She didn't buy the niece excuse, not for a second. Her gut told her he didn't belong here, and her gut was rarely wrong. She spoke quickly to the gate agent on the other end, her voice low but insistent, demanding confirmation of the ticket's validity. The agent hesitated, then confirmed it was legitimate, purchased 3 weeks ago by a Maya Carter. Laura's frown deepened. She didn't like being wrong, and she liked surprises even less. She hung up, her fingers drumming against the counter, her mind racing. Legitimate or not, something about this didn't sit right with her. She straightened her uniform, smoothing the fabric with a quick tug, and made up her mind. He wasn't staying in that seat. Not on her flight. She turned back toward the cabin, her expression hardening, ready to take control of the situation the way she always did. James sat quietly, his book unopened now, his eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. He could feel the tension building, a storm brewing in the distance, and he braced himself for it. He'd faced worse than this, he reminded himself. Far worse. Bullies in suits, judges with gavels, cops with batons. A flight attendant with a grudge was nothing he couldn't handle, but as the minutes ticked by, the excitement he'd felt about seeing Eleanor began to fade, replaced by a familiar weight, a burden he'd carried for decades. He adjusted his glasses, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his heart, and waited. Whatever came next, he'd meet it head-on. He always had. Laura Hensley marched back down the aisle of Flight 217, her heels striking the carpet with a purpose that turned heads. Her face, once unreadable, now carried a smug twist at the corners of her mouth, her blue eyes glinting with the certainty of someone who'd just confirmed her own suspicions. She'd made up her mind in the galley, ticket legitimacy be damned. James Carter didn't belong in first class, not on her watch. She stopped in front of his seat, her shadow looming over him like a storm cloud ready to burst. James looked up from his untouched book of poems, his gray eyes steady behind his glasses, sensing the shift in the air. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the cabin's hum, "there seems to be a mix-up with your ticket. I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy." Her words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate, drawing gasps from a few nearby passengers. James felt his heart stutter, a flicker of heat rising in his chest. "A mix-up?" he asked, his tone even but laced with a quiet challenge. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, and scrolled to a text from his niece, Maya. "Here," he said, holding it up for her to see. "My niece sent me this ticket confirmation 3 weeks ago. It's no mistake." Laura barely glanced at the screen, her lips curling into a thin, dismissive smirk. She folded her arms, her posture rigid, and leaned in slightly. "That doesn't change anything," she snapped. "This seat is for first-class passengers. You must have been assigned a different section." The accusation hung heavy, unspoken but clear. He didn't look the part. James tightened his grip on his cane, his knuckles whitening against the polished wood. "There is no mistake," he said firmly. "This is my seat." His voice carried the weight of a man who'd spent decades defending his right to exist in spaces others deemed off-limits. The cabin grew quieter, the chatter fading as passengers turned to watch. A woman in a red blazer clutched her purse, her eyes darting between James and Laura. The businessman from earlier lowered his phone, his merger forgotten. Laura's smirk faltered for a split second, but she doubled down, her voice rising. "Sir, I don't want to make this difficult," she said. "Please take your belongings and move to the back." James met her gaze, unyielding, his breath steady despite the humiliation creeping up his spine. He'd faced this before, the assumption, the dismissal, but it never got easier. He opened his mouth to protest again, but Laura cut him off, spinning around and signaling to the galley with a sharp wave. She wasn't asking anymore, she was demanding. Moments later, 2 security guards lumbered down the aisle, their boots thudding against the floor, their faces set in grim determination. They towered over James, one with a buzz cut and a jaw like concrete, the other with a patchy beard and a scowl. "Sir, you need to come with us," Buzzcut barked, his hand hovering near his belt. James looked up at them, then back at Laura, who stood with her arms crossed, watching like a queen overseeing an execution. "This is unnecessary," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I have every right to be here." The guards didn't care. Beardy grabbed his arm, yanking him up with a force that made his knees buckle. James stumbled, clutching his cane, but Buzzcut snatched it from his grip. "For safety," he growled, tucking it under his arm as if it were a weapon. The passengers erupted in whispers, some craning their necks, others pretending not to see. James felt the weight of their stares as the guards dragged him down the narrow aisle, his polished shoes scuffing the carpet, his suit jacket twisting under their grip. What had he done to deserve this? Could a ticket, a gift from his niece, really unravel into this kind of nightmare? His chest tightened, not from fear but from the raw, burning sting of injustice. He'd fought segregation in the 60s, argued cases in hostile courtrooms, and now, on a plane to see his dying sister, he was being treated like a criminal. Laura followed a few steps behind, her smirk widening, her victory sealed in her mind. She'd shown him his place, or so she thought. They reached the economy section, a sea of cramped seats and flickering overhead lights. The guards shoved James into an empty spot near the back, row 37, seat C, next to a snoring teenager and a woman with a screaming toddler. The space was tight, his long legs jamming against the seat in front, his shoulders brushing the armrests. Beardy tossed his travel bag onto his lap, the zipper half open, spilling a pair of socks onto the floor. "Stay here," he grunted, and the guards lumbered off, leaving James to catch his breath. His cane was gone, his dignity stripped, but his resolve hardened. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed a message to Maya. "They moved me to economy," he wrote, said it was a mix-up, but it's not. "They took my cane. Help." Maya's reply came fast, her words blazing across the screen. "What? Who did this?" "I'm calling the airline now." James exhaled, leaning back against the stiff cushion, the toddler's wails piercing his ears. He typed back, "The flight attendant, Laura Hensley." She didn't even check properly, just assumed I didn't belong. He hit send, then added, "Flight 217, Atlanta to Seattle. Tell them who I am." He slid the phone into his pocket, his mind racing. Maya wasn't just his niece, she was a tech mogul, a woman who'd built a cybersecurity empire and sat on the Airline's board as a key investor. If anyone could turn this around, it was her. But as the plane's engines roared to life, vibrating through the thin walls, James felt a chill settle over him. This wasn't just about a seat. This was about something deeper, something he'd fought his whole life. Was this the start of a battle he couldn't win? Laura returned to first class, her posture relaxed now, her smirk a permanent fixture. She poured herself a cup of water, sipping it slowly as she scanned the cabin. The passengers had settled back into their routines, the drama fading from their minds. She'd handled it, she thought, kept order the way she always did. Swift, firm, unquestioning. To her it was simple. If someone didn't fit, they didn't stay. She'd never second-guessed her instincts before, and she wasn't about to start now. But as the plane taxied toward the runway, a faint unease flickered in her gut. What if she'd misjudged this one? She shook it off, setting the cup down with a clink. It didn't matter. She was in control. Or so she believed. Hey, what do you think about Laura's snap judgment? Comment 1 if you've ever seen someone judged unfairly like James, and let's get this conversation going. If you're fired up about standing against prejudice, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories that hit hard. James thought he could reason with her, but Laura had other plans. How far will her actions take this flight? Stick around to find out. James sat in his new seat, the plane lifting off with a lurch that pressed him back. His hands rested on his knees, his breath slow and deliberate. He'd been here before, pushed aside, dismissed, but this time felt different. Why? Did it sting so much more now? Maybe because he'd let himself hope for a quiet trip, a moment of peace after a lifetime of struggle. He glanced out the window, the Atlanta skyline shrinking below, and made a silent vow. He wouldn't let this stand. But what would Laura do next? And what chaos awaited when Maya got involved? Tell me, how do you think this elderly man will fight back against a system stacked against him? The plane sliced through the sky, 5 minutes past takeoff. The Atlanta skyline a distant blur beneath the clouds. James Carter sat wedged in his economy seat, row 37, the toddler beside him kicking the tray table with relentless energy. His legs ached, cramped against the unforgiving metal frame, his hands resting empty without his cane. The hum of the engines buzzed in his ears, but his mind churned louder, replaying Laura Hensley's smug face, the guard's rough hands, the passengers' averted eyes. He'd sent his plea to Maya, his niece, and now he waited, his breath steady, but his pulse quickening. He'd learned long ago to trust her fire, her ability to move mountains when the world turned against him. But as the minutes ticked by, doubt gnawed at him. Could she really fix this from thousands of miles away? Up front, Laura stood in the first-class galley, wiping her hands on a napkin, her posture loose with the satisfaction of a job well done. She'd moved James, restored order, and now she poured a fresh cup of water, the plastic rim cool against her lips. The cabin had settled, the whispers fading into the usual drone of small talk and rustling newspapers. She glanced at her reflection, in the galley's steel counter, her blonde bun still tight, her uniform pristine. Control was hers again, the way it should be. She took a slow sip, savoring the quiet victory, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond her reach. The intercom crackled suddenly, slicing through the cabin's calm like a knife. "Miss Hensley, report to the cockpit immediately," came the voice deep and clipped. Unmistakably Captain Daniels. Laura froze, the cup pausing halfway to her mouth, her brows knitting together. A summons like this wasn't routine, not 5 minutes into a flight. She set the cup down, her fingers brushing the counter, and smoothed her skirt with a quick tug. The passengers barely noticed, too absorbed in their own worlds, but a prickle of unease crawled up her spine. What could the captain want now? She straightened her shoulders, forcing her face into a neutral mask, and stepped out of the galley, her heels clicking with measured precision as she approached the cockpit door. Inside, Captain Daniels sat rigid in his seat, his broad frame dwarfing the controls, his salt and pepper hair catching the dim light. At 56, he'd flown for decades, his sharp brown eyes missing nothing. Beside him, the co-pilot, a wiry man with a nervous tic, fiddled with a clipboard, avoiding Laura's gaze as she entered. She tapped the doorframe lightly, stepping in with a practiced smile. "Captain, you needed me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Daniels turned, his face a slab of stone, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. He didn't return her smile. "Sit down," he said, his tone flat, and gestured to a jump seat against the wall. Laura hesitated, then obeyed, her knees brushing the edge as she perched awkwardly, her hands folding in her lap. Before she could speak, the in-flight phone buzzed, its shrill tone cutting through the cockpit's silence. Daniels pressed a button, his movements deliberate, and a voice spilled out, crisp and commanding. "Is she there?" it asked, unmistakably female, carrying a weight that sent a shiver down Laura's spine. "Yes, she's here," Daniels replied, his voice low, his gaze never leaving Laura. The woman on the line didn't waste time. "This is Maya Carter, Flight Operations Board member and corporate investor. We've received a complaint about the removal of a first-class passenger, James Carter. I want an explanation. Now." Laura's breath hitched, her fingers tightening, in her lap. Maya Carter. The name rang a bell, a faint echo from boardroom rumors, but she hadn't connected it to the old man in 2A. Her mind raced, searching for footing, but Daniels cut in before she could respond. "He's my passenger, Maya," Daniels said, and she forced him out of his seat without cause. Laura's mouth opened, a protest forming, but Maya's voice sliced through like ice. "Did you verify his ticket through the system, Miss Hensley?" Laura swallowed, her throat dry as sandpaper. "I checked it," she said, forcing composure. "I believe there was a seating error. A lie, half true at best. She hadn't bothered with the system, just her gut." Maya's silence stretched, heavy and accusing, then her tone sharpened. "Did you confirm with the gate agent before dragging him out?" Laura's lips parted, but no sound came. She hadn't. She'd assumed, acted, and now the pause betrayed her. "No," she admitted, her voice shrinking. "I didn't." Daniels exhaled, a slow, heavy sound, his jaw tightening as he leaned back. "Do you even know who he is?" Maya asked, her words a blade twisting deeper. Laura's face flushed, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "No," she said quietly, her hands clenching tighter. Daniels turned fully now, his expression grim. "His name's James Carter," he said, "a retired civil rights lawyer, a VIP with this airline for 20 years. His niece, you, Maya, keeps us flying with her investments." Laura's stomach plummeted, the air thinning around her. She'd humiliated a man with more sway than she'd ever dreamed, and now it was crashing down. Maya's voice returned, cold and final. "You didn't just move a passenger, Miss Hensley. You shamed a legend on my dime." Laura's lips trembled, but no excuse came. Daniels leaned forward, his voice steady. "Corporate's orders are clear. You're to apologize, escort him back to first class in front of everyone, then you're done." The word hit her like a punch. "Done?" She blinked, her mind scrambling. "Fired?" Daniels nodded, his eyes hard. "Right now, mid-flight. Go fix it." Laura stood, her legs unsteady, her uniform suddenly suffocating. She stepped out, the cockpit door clicking shut behind her, and faced the cabin. The passengers blurred into a sea of faces, oblivious to the axe that had just fallen. She took a shaky breath, her heart pounding against her ribs, and started down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. Economy loomed ahead, row 37, where James sat, his head resting against the window, his eyes closed as if willing the world away. She stopped beside him, her voice cracking as she spoke. "Sir," she said, quieter than she'd ever been, "there's been a misunderstanding." James opened his eyes, turning slowly to face her, his gaze piercing through her faltering. Bravado. She cleared her throat, her hands twisting together. "I'd like to escort you back to your original seat in first class," she said, her words stumbling out, forced and brittle. The toddler's mother stopped rocking her child, staring openly. The teenager beside James pulled out an earbud, his jaw dropping. Whispers rippled through the rows, heads turning as Laura stood there, stripped of her authority, begging a man she'd just banished. James studied her, his silence deafening, then reached for his bag with careful hands. He stood, his frame tall despite the ache in his joints, and nodded once. "Lead the way," he said, his voice calm but commanding. A king, reclaiming his throne. Laura turned, her face burning, and walked back toward first class, James following, with measured steps, his head high. The passengers watched, some gasping, others murmuring, as the old man they'd seen dragged away now strode past them, victorious. Laura's heels faltered, her breath shallow, but she kept going, the weight of their stares crushing her. They reached 2A, and James lowered himself into the plush seat, adjusting his jacket with a quiet dignity that made her shrink. She stood there, trembling, as Daniel's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Hensley has been relieved of her duties, effective immediately, due to a serious breach of conduct. Please direct all needs to the remaining crew." The cabin erupted in gasps, eyes locking onto Laura, who stood frozen, her career imploding in real time. James leaned back, his hands resting on the armrests, a flicker of relief washing over him. He'd won, he thought. The seat was his again. The humiliation reversed. The woman in the red blazer nodded at him, a small gesture of respect. The businessman muttered something about justice. James closed his eyes, picturing Eleanor's smile, believing the worst was behind him. Laura stumbled to the galley, her hands gripping the counter, her breath ragged. Fired, mid-flight, in front of everyone. The shame clawed at her, but she couldn't fathom what came next. She'd lost everything in 5 minutes, all because of him. Or so she told herself, blind to the deeper truth unraveling beneath her feet. James Carter settled back into his first-class seat, the leather cool against his suit, his chest rising and falling with a slow, measured rhythm. The cabin of Flight 217 hummed softly around him, the engines a steady drone as the plane climbed, higher above the clouds. His hands rested on the armrests, the ache in his knees easing now that he had space to stretch. The woman in the red blazer 2 rows ahead offered a faint smile, a silent nod of solidarity, while the businessman resumed his phone call, his tone quieter now, as if chastened by the scene he'd witnessed. James let his eyes drift shut, the weight of the past hour lifting slightly. Laura Hensley was gone, fired in a blaze of public shame, and he was back where he belonged. He pictured his sister Eleanor's frail hand reaching for his when he landed in Seattle, a moment of peace after the storm. He'd won, he told himself, the battle over before it could truly begin. But the air felt too still, the victory too clean. Far below, in the airline's Atlanta operations hub, Victor Grayson sat hunched over a cluttered desk, his thick fingers drumming against a scratched oak surface. At 49, he was a bull of a man, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested. His graying hair cropped close to his scalp, his face etched with deep lines from years of barking orders. His office smelled of burnt coffee and stale cigars, the walls plastered with faded certificates and a single photo of him shaking hands with a senator. As the airline's operations supervisor, Victor wielded power over schedules, staff, and emergencies, a king in his own fiefdom. He'd mentored Laura Hensley for years, molding her sharp edges into a mirror of his own ruthlessness, and now his radio crackled with the news of her firing. Fired, mid-flight, over some old black guy, in first class. His jaw clenched, his dark eyes narrowing to slits as he listened to the captain's clipped report. James Carter, the name came through, a VIP, a troublemaker who'd cost Laura her job. Victor slammed the radio down, the plastic rattling against the desk, his breath heaving through his nose. He didn't care about James's title, his history, or his niece's money. To Victor, this was personal. Laura was his protege, his pride, and this Carter guy had humiliated her. Humiliated him, by extension. He'd dealt with passengers like this before, people who thought they could waltz into spaces they didn't earn, people he'd put back in their place with a flick of his wrist. His lips curled into a snarl, his mind racing with the old venom he'd carried since his days growing up in a small Georgia town, where he'd learned early that some folks didn't belong. James might have won this round, but Victor wasn't done, not by a long shot. He grabbed the phone, his thick fingers punching the numbers with force, and barked into the receiver. "Get me the cockpit of Flight 217, now." Up in the air, James opened his eyes as a flight attendant, a younger woman with curly brown hair and a nervous smile, approached. "Sir," she said softly, "can I get you anything? Water? A blanket?" Her kindness caught him off guard, a stark contrast to Laura's venom, and he nodded, his voice gentle. "Water would be fine, thank you." She scurried off, returning moments later, with a chilled bottle, her hands trembling slightly as she handed it over. James thanked her again, twisting the cap with a faint crack, and took a sip, the cold liquid soothing his dry throat. He leaned back, the tension in his shoulders unwinding, believing the worst was behind him. The cabin felt lighter now, the passengers' glances less hostile, some even tinged with respect. He reached for his book of poems, flipping it open, to a dog-eared page, letting the words blur into a quiet comfort. In the cockpit, Captain Daniels adjusted his headset, his brow furrowing as the radio hissed to life. Victor Grayson's voice boomed through, rough and commanding, cutting through the static. "Daniels, it's Grayson," he said. "We've got a situation. That passenger you just reinstated, James Carter, he's a security threat." Daniels blinked, his hand pausing over the controls. "A threat?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "What's the evidence?" Victor didn't hesitate, his words rehearsed, dripping with authority. "Reports from the ground crew in Atlanta, suspicious behavior, possible contraband in his bag. We can't take risks. Divert the flight to Boise, Idaho, immediately." Daniels exchanged a glance with the co-pilot, whose tick flared under the pressure. "Boise? That's 1,000 miles off course," Daniels said. "We're barely out of Georgia." Victor's voice hardened, a growl in his throat. "Do it, Captain, or I'll have your wings clipped too. Corporate's already on edge after Laura." "Don't test me." Daniels grit his teeth, his fingers tightening around the yoke. He didn't trust Victor. Never had. The man was a bully with a title. But the chain of command left little room for debate. He sighed, flipping switches with a practiced hand, and keyed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice steady but strained due to an unexpected situation, "we're diverting to Boise, Idaho. Please remain seated and calm. We apologize for the inconvenience." The cabin erupted in groans, passengers shifting in confusion, but James felt a chill snake down his spine. "Boise? Why Boise?" He set the water bottle down, his hand trembling slightly, the unease from earlier, creeping back. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The plane banked left, the horizon tilting outside the window, and minutes stretched into an eternity as the aircraft descended toward Boise. Laura, still in the galley, her face pale and her hands gripping the counter, overheard the announcement through the wall. A faint smirk flickered across her lips, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Maybe Victor had her back after all. She stayed silent, her mind spinning, knowing better than to show her cards yet. The plane touched down with a jolt, tires screeching, against the tarmac, and the cabin lights flickered as it rolled to a stop. James peered out the window, his heart sinking as he saw flashing red and blue lights converging on the aircraft. Police cars, 3 of them flanked by armed officers in tactical vests, their faces grim under the Idaho sun. The jetway extended with a groan, and the cabin door swung open, letting in a gust of dry, warm air. Heavy boots pounded up the steps, and 4 officers stormed aboard, their voices booming through the plane. "James Carter," they shouted. "Stand up, hands where we can see them." James froze, his breath catching as passengers gasped, some ducking behind their seats, others staring wide-eyed. He raised his hands slowly, his voice calm despite the panic clawing at his gut. "I'm James Carter," he said. "What's this about?" The lead officer, a stocky man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek, stepped forward, his pistol drawn but low. "You're under arrest," he barked. "Suspicion of terrorism. Step into the aisle. Now." James stood, his legs shaky without his cane, his suit wrinkled from the cramped economy seat. The officers grabbed his arms, their grips iron tight, and yanked him forward, his feet stumbling as they pulled him toward the exit. Passengers whispered furiously, some filming with shaky phones, others clutching their armrests in shock. Terrorism? The word echoed in James's mind, absurd and surreal, a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He glanced back, catching Laura's eye as she peeked from the galley, her smirk now a full grin, fleeting but unmistakable. The officers dragged him down the jetway, the metal walls closing in, his bag slung over one of their shoulders. He'd thought he'd won, thought the seat was the end of it, but this was something else, something monstrous. Victor leaned back in his chair in Atlanta, a satisfied grunt escaping his throat as he hung up the phone. He'd planted the seed, twisted the truth just enough to make it stick. James Carter wouldn't just lose his seat this time, he'd lose everything. Victor cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the empty office, and lit a fresh cigar, the smoke curling around his head like a crown. He'd show this old man what happened when you crossed him. The game was far from over, and Victor was just getting started. James Carter stumbled out of the jetway into the blinding Boise sun, the Idaho tarmac shimmering with heat as the police officer's grips tightened around his arms. His suit jacket hung crooked, one sleeve torn from the rough handling, his legs wobbling without his cane to steady him. The lead officer, Scarface, shoved him toward a waiting squad car, its lights flashing red and blue like a predator's eyes. Passengers from Flight 217 peered through the plane's windows, some filming, others gaping, as the words "terrorism suspect" buzzed through the crowd. James's chest heaved, his breath shallow, his mind reeling. Terrorism? Him? A 72-year-old, man with a book of poems and a ticket to see his dying sister? The absurdity clawed at him, but the cold steel of handcuffs snapping around his wrists made it real. He glanced back, catching Laura Hensley's silhouette in the galley window, her grin a fleeting slash of triumph before she ducked out of sight. The officers yanked open the squad car's door, Scarface barking orders as they searched James's travel bag. Beardy, the second cop, pulled out a small metal tin, popping it open with a smirk. "Look at this," he said, holding up a handful of wires and a tiny battery. "Suspicious items, huh?" James's stomach dropped, his voice rising despite the ache in his throat. "That's not mine," he said. "I've never seen that before." Scarface snorted, tossing the tin into an evidence bag. "Sure, old man," he muttered. "We'll let the feds sort it out." James's eyes widened, his hands trembling in the cuffs. "Planted." The word screamed in his head. But who? Laura? Someone higher? He'd barely processed the thought when they shoved him into the car, the door slamming shut with a hollow thud, trapping him in a cage of vinyl and stale air. The drive to the Boise precinct was a blur, the city's flat streets whipping past as James sat in silence, his knees jammed against the partition. The cuffs bit into his skin, his arthritis flaring. With every jolt, but he kept his face still, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. He needed to stay calm, figure out who was behind this, how deep it went. The car lurched to a stop outside a squat gray building, its windows dark and uninviting. Scarface hauled him out, dragging him through a side door into a frigid interrogation room. The walls were bare concrete, the air thick with the smell of sweat and mildew. A single metal chair bolted to the floor. They uncuffed him just long enough to shove him down, then snapped the restraints to a ring on the table, leaving his arms stretched taut. "Where's my cane?" James asked, his voice steady but hoarse. "I need it to stand." Beardy laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Not a chance," he said. "Might use it to attack us." They left, the door clanging shut, plunging him into silence. Hours crawled by, the cold seeping into James's bones, his medication for his heart condition still in his confiscated bag. He shifted in the chair, wincing as pain shot through his hips, his mind racing to piece it together. Victor Grayson's Name flickered in his thoughts. A shadow from Laura's firing, a man with enough pull to twist the airline into knots. Back on the plane, Laura leaned against the galley counter, her pulse steadying as she typed a quick text to Victor. "Thanks for the save," she wrote. "Knew you'd handle it." His reply buzzed back fast. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This is just the start." She smirked, tucking the phone away, her firing a distant sting now. Victor had her back, and James Carter was about to learn what happened when you crossed them. In Atlanta, Victor paced his office, the cigar smoke curling around him like a fog. He'd called in a favor with a Boise contact, a crooked ground crew chief who'd planted the wires in James's bag before takeoff, a perfect setup. He grinned, dialing a local news outlet, his voice smooth as he leaked the story. "Got a scoop for you," he said. "Terrorism suspect nabbed mid-flight, James Carter, some radical with a history." The reporter ate it up, and within an hour, headlines blazed across screens. "Civil rights lawyer turned terrorist, man detained after flight diversion." Victor watched the chaos unfold online, his chest swelling with pride. This wasn't just revenge for Laura, it was a lesson, a reminder of who held the real power. James sat in the interrogation room, his head pounding, when Scarface returned, a tablet in hand. "Your bag's full of bomb parts," he said, sliding the device across the table, showing grainy photos of the tin. "Care to explain?" James leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the images. "That was planted," he said. "I'm a retired lawyer, not a terrorist. I demand my phone call." Scarface smirked, leaning in close, his breath sour with coffee. "You don't get demands," he said. "You're a threat." He left again, and James slumped back, his heart racing, the lack of meds making his chest tight. He'd faced crooked cops before, but this was different, bigger, a machine grinding him down. Across the country in Seattle, Maya Carter sat in her sleek office, her fingers flying across her laptop as James's text burned in her mind. She'd gotten Laura fired, but this? A terrorism charge? She called her lawyer, a wiry ex-prosecutor, named Lena Hayes, her voice sharp with fury. "They've framed him, Lena," she said. "Boise police, airline involvement. It's a setup." Lena's response was calm, calculated. "I'm on it," she said. "I'll be there in 6 hours. Get me everything." "You've got." Maya hung up, her jaw tight, and pulled up the airline's internal logs, her tech skills slicing through firewalls. She found Victor's name, his calls to the cockpit, his ground crew orders, and sent it all to Lena, her blood boiling. James wasn't just a passenger. He was her uncle, her hero, and she'd burn the world down to save him. The news hit social media like wildfire, hashtags trending as clips of James's arrest looped endlessly. "Terrorist or targeted?" one post asked, racking up thousands of shares. James's face, calm but weary, flashed across screens, his civil rights legacy clashing with Victor's lies. In the precinct, Scarface returned, slamming a file on the table. "You're famous now," he said, grinning. "Too bad it's for all the wrong reasons." James met his gaze, his voice low but firm. "You've got nothing real," he said. "This won't hold." Scarface shrugged, leaving him alone again, the clock ticking past midnight. 12 hours since he'd boarded that plane. "Hey, can you believe they'd frame an innocent man like this?" Comment 1 if you think James deserves justice, not jail, and let's shine a light on this mess. If you're raging at how fast lies can spread, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories that pull no punches. Victor's playing dirty, but Maya's not backing down. Will she get him out before it's too late? James sat in the dark, his wrists raw, his body screaming for relief. But his spirit held firm. He'd survived worse, he told himself. Lynch, mobs in Alabama, false charges in Mississippi, a lifetime of battles. But as the cold tightened its grip, a question gnawed at him. How much deeper could this go? Victor had turned a seat dispute into a national scandal. But what came next? Could Maya's power outmatch a man who'd rewrite reality itself? Tell me, what do you think happens when a mastermind like Victor doubles down on revenge? James Carter sat slumped in the Boise precinct's interrogation room, the cold metal chair digging into his back, His wrists chafed raw from the handcuffs. 12 hours had passed since his arrest, the clock on the wall ticking past 2 in the morning, its hands mocking his exhaustion. His suit was a wrinkled mess. His knees throbbed without his cane, and his chest tightened from the lack of heart medication still locked away in his confiscated bag. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face, but his gray eyes remained sharp, glinting with the resilience of a man who'd faced down worse odds. He'd survived the night, endured Scarface's taunts and the planted evidence, clinging to the hope that Maya, his fierce niece, was fighting for him somewhere beyond these walls. The door creaked open, and he straightened, expecting another round of jeers, but instead, a new figure stepped inside. Lena Hayes was a force compacted into a wiry frame, her short black hair streaked with silver, her brown eyes cutting through the room like a blade. At 48, she'd spent 2 decades as a prosecutor before flipping sides to defend the wrongly accused, her reputation built on dismantling crooked cases. She carried a leather briefcase, her navy blazer crisp despite the red-eye flight from Seattle, and her presence shifted the air. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm Lena Hayes, your lawyer. Maya sent me." James exhaled, a flicker of relief softening his features. "Thank God," he murmured, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them on the table. Lena set her briefcase down, popping it open with a snap, and pulled out a tablet. "We've got work to do," she said. "I've seen the evidence, and it's a sham." She slid the tablet toward him, the screen glowing with photos of the metal tin and wires from his bag. "This," she said, tapping the image, "was planted by the airline's ground crew in Atlanta. I've got Maya's data, logs showing Victor Grayson's, orders to tamper with your luggage before takeoff." James's jaw tightened, his suspicions confirmed. "Victor," he said. "The supervisor?" Lena nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "He's the puppet master," she said, "pulling strings to frame you as a terrorist." But he slipped up. "The crew chief's sloppy, left fingerprints on the tin that don't match yours. I've already filed a motion with the Boise DA to dismiss this nonsense." James leaned back, his breath steadying. "How soon?" he asked. Lena glanced at her watch. "Give me an hour," she said. "I'm meeting the prosecutor now." She left, the door clanging shut, and James sat alone again, the silence less oppressive now. Lena's confidence fueled him, a lifeline in the dark. He pictured Maya hunched over her, laptop, her tech empire bending the world to save him, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. 12 hours of hell, but he wasn't broken yet. In Atlanta, Victor Grayson paced his office, the cigar stub smoldering in an ashtray, his phone buzzing with updates. The Boise arrest had gone viral, the media eating up his radical lawyer narrative. But a new thread online caught his eye. A leak about planted evidence. His fist slammed the desk, the wood groaning under the blow. "Maya?" he snarled. "She's digging too deep." He grabbed his phone, dialing a contact in Seattle, a corrupt cop named Reed he'd known since their academy days. "Get ready," he growled. "Carter might slip this, but he's not safe yet." Back in Boise, Lena stormed into the prosecutor's office, a cramped room smelling of stale donuts and burnt coffee. The DA, a balding man with tired eyes, flinched as she slapped her evidence on his desk, a stack of printouts and a USB drive. "Fingerprints don't match," she said, her voice a whip, "and airline logs prove tampering. You've got no case, just a racist frame-up. Drop it, or I'll bury you in court." The DA skimmed the files, his face paling as he saw Victor's name tied to the orders. He rubbed his temples, muttering about jurisdiction, but Lena leaned in, her stare unrelenting. 12 hours illegal detention, she said. "I'll sue this precinct into the ground." He sighed, signing the release papers with a shaky hand. "Fine," he said. "He's out." Lena smirked, grabbing the documents, and marched back to the precinct. James stood as Lena returned, her heels clicking with triumph. "You're free," she said. "Charges dropped, evidence debunked." The guard, a new face with a bored expression, unlocked his cuffs, and James rubbed his wrists, the skin red and raw. "My cane?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lena handed it over. Retrieved from evidence. It's polished, wood a comfort in his grip. He leaned on it, his legs unsteady but his spirit lifting. They walked out together, the precinct doors swinging open to a gray dawn, the air crisp against his face. A rental car waited, Lena's doing, and she drove him to Boise Airport, her silence a steady reassurance. James sank into the passenger seat, his body aching but his mind clear. "I thought it was over," he said, back in first class. Lena glanced at him, her eyes softening. "It's not," she said, "but we're fighting." At the airport, Maya had booked him a new flight to Seattle. First class again, boarding in an hour. James limped through security, his cane tapping a slow rhythm, and reached the gate as passengers murmured, some recognizing him from the news. He boarded, settling into seat 1B, the leather cradling his battered frame. The new flight attendant, a tall man with a warm smile, offered him coffee, his kindness a balm after Laura's venom. The plane took off, Boise shrinking below, and James sipped the drink, the warmth spreading through him. Passengers cheered softly as he settled in, a woman whispering, "You deserve this, sir." Social media buzzed with his release, posts hailing him as a victim of racism, hashtags like "Justice for James" trending high. He closed his eyes, believing the nightmare had ended. The fight won. Victor watched the updates roll in, his office, dim as the cigar burned out. Released. Charges dropped. The words seared his vision, his fists clenching until his knuckles popped. Maya's lawyer had outmaneuvered him, turned his perfect setup into a public embarrassment. He growled, kicking a chair across the room, the crash echoing off the walls. He'd underestimated her, underestimated James. But he wasn't finished. He dialed Reed again, his voice low and venomous. "Carter's landing in Seattle soon," he said. "I've got a warrant ready. Assault on Laura, fake but tight. Take him down hard when he steps off." Reed chuckled, a gravelly sound. "On it," he said. "He won't see it coming." Victor hung up, leaning back with a dark grin. James might think he'd won, but this was just a breather before the real storm. James gazed out the plane window, the Cascades rising in the distance, Seattle drawing near. He'd see Eleanor soon, hold her hand, tell her he'd made it through. The passengers' cheers lingered in his ears, their support a shield against the past 12 hours. He adjusted his glasses, his hands steadier now, and pulled out his book of poems, flipping to a line about resilience under fire. It fit, he thought, a quiet triumph swelling in his chest. The plane descended, the wheels kissing the tarmac with a soft thud, and he exhaled, ready to step off as a free man. But as the jetway loomed, a shadow waited. One he couldn't yet see, one that would turn his victory to ash. In the galley, the new attendant tidied up, oblivious to the chaos brewing outside. Laura, grounded in Boise, sat in a terminal lounge, her phone lighting up with Victor's texts. She'd been fired, but he'd promised her a way back, a chance to watch James fall harder. She smirked, sipping a cheap coffee, her shame buried under a fresh layer of spite. Victor's plan was rolling, and she'd be there to see it through. James unbuckled his seatbelt, his cane firm in his grip, believing the worst was behind him. He couldn't know how wrong he was. The plane taxied to the gate at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the tarmac as James Carter unbuckled his seatbelt. His first-class seat, 1B, cradled his weary frame, the leather still warm, from the short flight from Boise. His cane rested firm in his grip, its polished wood a lifeline after 12 hours without it, and his suit, though wrinkled, hung with a quiet dignity. The soft cheers from passengers lingered in his ears, their whispers of support a balm after the nightmare of arrest and false charges. He adjusted his glasses, his gray eyes catching the glint of the overhead light, and stood slowly, wincing as his knees protested. The new flight attendant, a tall man with a kind face, nodded warmly as James moved toward the exit, his steps steady but slow. He'd made it, he thought, to Seattle, to Eleanor, his sister fading in hospice care. The worst was over, or so he believed. The jetway stretched ahead, a tunnel of gray metal and dim lights, the air cool and faintly stale. James shuffled forward, his cane tapping a soft rhythm, his travel bag slung over his shoulder, its weight a reminder of the planted evidence he'd just escaped. Passengers from economy trailed behind, their chatter a distant hum, but the jetway felt oddly quiet, the usual bustle muted. He reached the halfway point, the gate in sight, when a figure emerged from the shadows, broad and menacing, blocking his path. Officer Reed stood 6'3", his Seattle PD uniform stretched tight over a barrel chest, his buzzed blonde hair glinting under the fluorescent bulbs. His green eyes narrowed, his thick hands resting on his belt, a falsified warrant crumpled in his fist. "James Carter," he barked, his voice a gravelly growl. "You're under arrest." James froze, his breath catching, his cane halting mid-tap. "Arrest?" he asked, his tone steady but laced with disbelief. "I was just cleared in Boise. What's this about?" Reed stepped closer, his boots thudding against the floor, a smirk twisting his scarred lip. "Assault," he said. "You attacked a flight attendant. Mid-flight, Laura Hensley. Got a witness statement and a warrant right here." He waved the paper, its ink fresh from Victor Grayson's printer. A lie crafted with precision. James's mind raced, his lawyer's instincts flaring. "That's impossible," he said. "She was fired. I never touched her." Reed's smirk widened, his hand darting out to grab James's arm, twisting it hard. "Tell it to the judge," he snarled, yanking him forward with a force that made James stumble, his cane clattering to the ground. Screams erupted behind them, passengers spilling from the plane, some clutching phones, others shouting in confusion. Reed didn't flinch, his grip tightening as he slammed James against the jetway wall, the metal cold against his cheek. James grunted, pain shooting through his shoulder, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Let me go," he said, his voice hoarse. "This is a mistake." Reed laughed, a harsh guttural sound, and drove his knee into James's back, pinning him there. "No mistake," he said. "You're done, old man." He reached for his baton, its black surface gleaming, and swung it down, striking James's side with a sickening crack. James gasped, his knees buckling, blood seeping through his torn shirt as travelers shrieked, their voices a chaotic blur. Maya Carter burst through the gate, her sleek black coat billowing, her dark eyes wild with panic. She'd raced to SeaTac after Lena's call confirming James's release, expecting to greet him with a hug. Not this. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she hit record, capturing Reed's baton crashing down again, James's body crumpling under the blows. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice piercing the chaos. "He's innocent." Reed spun, his face twisting, with rage, and lunged at her, snatching the phone from her hand. "Evidence," he growled, pocketing it with a sneer. "You're interfering with an arrest." Maya staggered back, her fists clenched, but two more officers emerged, blocking her path, their hands on their holsters, daring her to move. James lay sprawled on the jetway floor, his breath ragged, blood pooling beneath him, his cane just out of reach. Passengers crowded the gate, some filming, others yelling for help, but the officers formed a wall, their shouts drowning out the "please." Reed hauled James up, his grip bruising, and dragged him toward the terminal, his limp body leaving a smear of red on the carpet. Maya followed, her voice breaking as she called after him. "I'll fix this, Uncle James," she said. "I swear," but Reed shoved her back, his elbow catching her chest, sending her stumbling into the crowd. James turned his head, his vision blurring, her anguished face the last thing he saw before the officers pulled him through a side door. Victor Grayson watched from a distance, leaning against a pillar in the terminal, his thick arms crossed, a dark grin splitting his face. He'd landed in Seattle an hour earlier, a private flight to oversee his next move, and now he savored the chaos unfolding. Reed had executed the plan flawlessly, the fake warrant a masterpiece of corruption, Laura's statement typed up in Boise and faxed over with Victor's signature. He'd turned James's release into a trap, a brutal lesson in who held the real power. His phone buzzed, a text from Laura flashing across the screen. "He's down," she wrote. "Good work." Victor chuckled, pocketing the device, his eyes glinting with malice. This wasn't over, not until James was broken beyond repair. The squad car roared out of SeaTac. James slumped in the back, his side throbbing, His glasses cracked against his face. Reed drove, his knuckles white on the wheel, humming a tuneless song, as if this were just another day. James pressed his hand to his ribs, feeling the wet warmth of blood, his breath shallow but his mind sharp. Victor, he thought. This was Victor. Reed's attack too precise, too timed. He'd faced beatings before, fists and batons in back alleys during the civil rights marches. But this was surgical, a strike meant to bury him. His sister Eleanor flashed in his mind, her hospice bed waiting, her time slipping away, and a pang of despair cut deeper than the pain in his body. Would he ever reach her now? Maya raced to her car in the parking lot, her breath hitching as she dialed Lena Hayes, her voice trembling with fury. "They beat him, Lena," she said. "Some cop named Reed, fake assault charge, took my phone with the video." Lena's reply crackled through, calm but urgent. "I'm on my way," she said. "Get to the precinct. I'll pull every string I've got." Maya slammed the car into gear, tires squealing as she peeled out, her heart pounding. She'd seen James fall, seen the blood, and the image burned into her skull. Victor had escalated this beyond a seat, beyond a frame-up, into something vicious, personal. She gripped the wheel, her resolve hardening. She'd save him no matter what it took. At the precinct, Reed shoved James into a holding cell, the bars clanging shut, his bloodied form collapsing onto a concrete bench. No medic came, no questions asked, just Reed's smirk as he walked away, tossing James's cane into a corner, like trash. James clutched his side, his suit soaked red, his glasses dangling from one ear, but his eyes burned with defiance. He'd survived Boise, survived the lies, and he'd survived this. But as the cell's chill sank into his bones, he felt the weight of Victor's reach, a man who wouldn't stop until he'd crushed every piece of him. His sister's visit hung in the balance, a fragile thread ready to snap. Victor lingered, at the airport, watching travelers scatter, their phones buzzing with clips of the attack. He lit a fresh cigar, the flame flickering in his thick fingers, and exhaled a plume of smoke. James thought he'd won in Boise, thought Maya's money could shield him, but Victor thrived in the shadows, where warrants bent and fists flew. He'd turned a simple flight into a war, and he'd fight it to the end. James's blood on the jetway was just the beginning, a taste of the hell still to come. James Carter slumped on the concrete bench of the Seattle precinct's holding cell, his blood-soaked suit clinging to his battered frame, his cracked glasses dangling from one ear. Pain radiated from his ribs where Officer Reed's baton had struck, each breath a shallow rasp, his cane lying useless in the corner where it had been tossed. The cell's steel bars loomed cold and unyielding, the air thick with the stench of bleach and despair, but his gray eyes burned with a quiet, fire unbroken despite the beating. Hours had passed since the jetway ambush, the clock on the wall ticking toward midnight, and no medic had come, no questions asked, just the echo of Reed's smirk as he'd locked him in. James pressed a trembling hand to his side, feeling the sticky warmth of blood, his mind racing. Victor Grayson, he knew, was behind this, a shadow pulling strings, turning a flight into a war. But how far could one man's reach extend? The cell block door clanged open, and Reed strode in, his boots thudding with purpose, a twisted grin splitting his scarred face. "Up, Carter," he barked, dragging James to his feet with a yank that made his knees buckle. James gritted his teeth, pain searing through him, but he straightened, leaning on the wall for support. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. Reed didn't answer, just shoved him forward, guiding him down a dim hallway to a lineup room, its walls scratched and gray, a one-way mirror gleaming under harsh lights. 5 other men shuffled in, all black, all older, their faces weary, plucked from cells to fill the charade. James stood third in line, his suit a stark contrast to their orange jumpsuits, his bloodied shirt a silent scream of injustice. Across town, Victor Grayson sat in a dimly lit airport lounge, a whiskey glass sweating in his hand, his thick frame slouched in a leather chair. He'd stayed in Seattle after the ambush, savoring the chaos, his phone buzzing with updates from Reed. Laura Hensley had landed hours ago, reinstated by Victor's pull with a crooked HR exec, her firing overturned with a forged appeal. She'd texted him from Boise, her words dripping with spite. "I'm back," she wrote, ready to bury him. Victor grinned, sipping the amber liquid, its burn fueling his malice. He'd rigged the lineup, coached Laura's lie, and called in a favor. With Judge Harlan Pierce, an old golf buddy with a taste for bribes and a disdain for troublemakers like James. The system was his weapon now, sharpened to cut deeper than any baton. In the precinct, Laura stepped into the observation room, her navy uniform crisp again, her blonde bun tight, her smirk a polished blade. She stood beside Reed, her arms crossed, watching as James took his place in the lineup. A detective, a wiry man with a clipboard, nodded at her. "That's him," she said, pointing at James without hesitation. "He threatened me mid-flight, said he'd make me pay for moving him." Her voice was steady, rehearsed, a lie so smooth it slid past the detective's tired scrutiny. James's fists clenched at his sides, his ears catching her words through the glass, outrage flaring in his chest. "That's a lie," he shouted. "I never spoke to her after she was fired." The detective scribbled a note, unfazed, and waved him silent, the cops nodding as if her word were gospel. Maya Carter paced outside the precinct, her black coat whipping. In the night wind, her phone pressed to her ear as Lena Hayes' voice crackled through. "They've got him in a lineup," Maya said, her tone sharp. "Reed beat him. Now this." Lena's reply was clipped, urgent. "I'm 10 minutes out," she said. "Get that video online. It's our only shot." Maya's phone, snatched by Reed, was gone. But a passenger's clip had surfaced, shaky footage of the jetway attack leaking onto social media. She'd forwarded it to her team, hackers and activists who'd pushed it viral. Millions of views lighting up screens with cries of, "Free James, Carter." Protests swelled outside the precinct, a crowd chanting his name, their signs glowing under streetlights. But Victor countered fast, leaking a doctored clip through a fake account, showing James lunging at Laura mid-flight, a seamless forgery that muddied the truth. Inside, the lineup ended, and Reed dragged James to a courtroom down the hall. A late-night arraignment rushed through Victor's strings. Judge Pierce sat high on the bench, his jowly face flushed from a dinner of steak and wine, his black robe wrinkled from haste. He peered down at James, his eyes cold, dismissing Lena's absence with a wave. "Assault on a flight attendant," he said, reading the falsified charge. "Serious offense." James stood, his caneless frame trembling but tall, his voice cutting through the room. "It's a lie, Your Honor," he said. "I'm the victim here, beaten and framed." Pierce smirked, glancing at Laura in the gallery, her nod confirming her tale. "Bail denied," he barked, banging his gavel, remanded to custody. Reed hauled James back to the cell, the bars slamming shut, his sister Eleanor's fading life now a distant dream. Victor watched the news from the lounge, a local station flashing James's mugshot, the headline screaming, "Civil rights hero or violent thug." He chuckled, the whiskey glass empty now, his plan clicking into place. Laura's lie, Reed's fists, Pierce's gavel, all pieces of a machine he'd oiled with hate and power. Protests raged outside, but the doctored video sowed doubt, splitting the crowd, some turning away, convinced James was guilty. Maya stormed into the precinct, her face pale, finding Lena at the desk, arguing with a clerk. "They've buried him," Maya said, her voice breaking. "No bail, no chance." Lena gripped her arm, her eyes fierce. "We've got the real video," she said, "and Victor's tracks. We fight back now." James sat in the cell, his blood drying into a crust, his ribs screaming with every move, but his spirit held firm. He'd faced rigged courts before, judges who saw his skin before his case, and he'd outlasted them all. Eleanor's face haunted him, her hospice bed empty without him, and a tear slipped down his cheek, the first he'd shed since this began. Victor had turned the system against him, a wall of lies and fists. But James whispered to himself, "I'm still here." He'd fight, even from this cage, because giving up wasn't in him. Imagine a system so twisted it locks up a hero like James. Comment 1 if you think justice is blind only when it wants to be, and let's unpack this outrage together. If you're sick of seeing power crush the innocent, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. Victor's winning, but Maya's ready to strike. Can she break this wall of corruption? James leaned against the cell wall, his breath a faint wheeze, the cold steel pressing into his bruised back. He'd thought Boise was the end, thought freedom was his. But Victor's reach stretched further than he'd feared, a web of deceit tightening around him. How much more could he take? Maya's voice echoed in his mind, her promise to fix this. But as the night deepened, a question loomed, sharp and unyielding. What happens when a man with nothing left to lose fights a monster who won't stop? Tell me, how do you think this battered warrior will rise from these ashes? James Carter sat hunched in the Seattle precinct's holding cell, the concrete bench cold against his battered frame, his blood-crusted suit a testament to Reed's brutality. His cracked glasses rested crooked on his nose, his ribs aching with every shallow breath, his cane still tossed in the corner like a discarded relic. The cell's steel bars loomed, the air heavy with mildew, but his gray eyes glinted with defiance, a spark unbroken by the rigged lineup or Judge Pierce's gavel. Dawn crept through a high, grimy window, painting the walls in faint streaks of gold. 16 hours since the jetway ambush, and he clung to the thought of Maya, his niece, fighting for him beyond these walls. Eleanor's hospice bed haunted him, her time slipping away. But he whispered to himself, "Hold on, I'm coming." A vow to outlast this nightmare. Outside, Maya Carter stood in the precinct parking lot, her black coat whipping in the morning breeze, her dark eyes blazing as she coordinated with her team. Her phone buzzed with updates from hackers and activists she'd rallied overnight, a network of tech wizards who'd cracked Victor Grayson's digital fortress. She'd spent hours in her car, laptop glowing, sifting through airline logs Maya had sent earlier, now joined by fresh leaks, Victor's racist emails to Reed, bribe records to Judge Pierce, audio of him ordering the ground crew to plant evidence in Boise. Her voice trembled with fury as she spoke to Lena Hayes, who'd arrived. At the precinct, her navy blazer rumpled, but her resolve sharp. "We've got him, Lena," Maya said. "Proof he's dirty from top to bottom." Lena clutched a tablet loaded with the files, her lips curling into a grim smile. "Let's burn him down," she said, heading inside to file an emergency appeal. Lena stormed the precinct clerk's desk, slamming the evidence down with a thud that echoed through the quiet lobby. "I want James Carter released now," she said, her voice a whip. "This is corruption, documented and airtight." The clerk, a young man with nervous hands, skimmed the papers, his eyes widening at Victor's name. He stammered, "I need to call the judge," but Lena leaned in, her stare piercing. "Call who you want," she said, "but this hits the press in 10 minutes if he's not out." The clerk scrambled for the phone, dialing Pierce, who'd slunk home after the arraignment, his bribe-stained hands now shaking as he heard the news. "Evidence?" he sputtered. "How?" Lena's files had blindsided him, Victor's secrets spilling like blood, and he knew his bench was at risk. "Release him," he barked, voice cracking. "No bail, just get him out." In Atlanta, Victor Grayson sat in his office, the cigar smoke stale around him, his thick fingers scrolling through a burner phone. The doctored video of James lunging at Laura still trended, but Maya's leaks were gaining ground. Hashtags like Expose Victor clawing at his narrative. His desk phone rang, a contact at the airline HQ, voice tight with panic. "They've got your emails, Vic," he said. "Board suspending you. Laura, too. Pending review." Victor's fist smashed the desk, wood splintering, a roar escaping his throat. Suspended? After all he'd built? He hung up, his mind racing, and dialed a new number. A thug named Dixon he'd used for dirty jobs. "Carter's house in Atlanta," he growled. "Burn it. Plant evidence. Make it look like he torched it for insurance." Dixon grunted assent, and Victor leaned back, his dark eyes glinting. Suspension wouldn't stop him, not yet. At the precinct, the cell door swung open, a guard grumbling as he uncuffed James, tossing his cane at his feet. "You're out," he said. "Lawyer's magic." James stood, wincing as he gripped the cane, his legs unsteady, but his spirit surging. Lena waited in the hall, her arms crossed, a rare smile breaking her stern face. "We did it," she said. "Victor's exposed. Charges dropped." James exhaled, his voice rough but warm. "Maya?" he asked. Lena nodded. "She's a force. Got the proof that broke this." They stepped outside, the morning air sharp against James's bruised skin. A crowd of protesters erupting in cheers as he emerged, their signs waving high. "Justice for James!" they shouted, phones flashing as they filmed his limping stride. A hero reclaimed. Maya rushed to him, her arms wrapping around his frail frame, careful of his injuries. "I'm so sorry, Uncle James," she said, tears brimming. "I should have stopped this sooner." He hugged her back, his cane trembling in his grip. "You saved me," he said. "That's enough." Lena led them to a waiting car, and they drove straight to Eleanor's hospice, a low brick building nestled in Seattle's suburbs. James stepped inside, his heart pounding as he reached her room, the antiseptic smell sharp in his nose. Eleanor lay frail under white sheets, her skin paper thin, her eyes fluttering open at his voice. "James?" she whispered, a weak smile breaking through. He sank into a chair beside her, grasping her hand, its warmth a lifeline. "I'm here," he said. "I made it." She squeezed back, faint but real, and for a moment, the world beyond faded. Victor's suspension hit the news, headlines screaming, "Airline exec exposed in racism scandal. Maya's leaks dismantling his empire." The board scrambled, firing Laura again, her reinstatement revoked as her lies unraveled. She sat in a Boise hotel, her phone dark, her career ashes once more. But Victor didn't flinch, his thug Dixon already in Atlanta, creeping through James's quiet neighborhood under dusk's cover. The house, a modest ranch James had lived in for 40 years, stood dark, its windows reflecting the fading light. Dixon splashed gasoline across the porch, the stench rising as he struck a match, flames roaring to life, licking up the walls with a hungry crackle. He planted a forged insurance claim in the mailbox, a final twist of Victor's knife, then vanished into the night. James sat by Eleanor's bedside, her breathing steady for now, his own pain dulled by her presence. He told her stories of their childhood, her faint laugh a gift, believing he'd finally turned the tide. The crowd outside the precinct had hailed him, social media crowned him a survivor, and Victor's suspension felt like a lock snapping shut. He leaned back, his cane resting against the chair, his cracked glasses fogging with quiet tears. The fight had cost him, bruised his body, stolen his peace. But he'd won this round, he thought. The war over. Eleanor's hand tightened in his, a fragile anchor, and he smiled, ready to rest. In Atlanta, Victor watched a grainy video from Dixon, the flames consuming James's house, a glowing wound against the night sky. He grinned, tossing the burner phone into a drawer, his suspension a minor sting next to this victory. The insurance frame would hit James soon, a new charge to drag him back into hell, and Victor relished the thought, his thick fingers cracking with anticipation. Reed texted from Seattle. "Warrant's ready when it lands," he wrote. "We'll nab him again." Victor nodded to himself, the game still his. The board slap a hiccup he'd outlast. James might sit with his sister now, but the fire was coming, a blaze to burn his hope to cinders. Maya stepped outside the hospice, her phone buzzing with alerts, her hackers tracking Victor's moves. She'd crippled him, she thought, his suspension a win. Laura's firing a bonus, but a nagging itch told her he wasn't done. She called Lena, her voice low. "We've got him on the ropes," she said, "but he's too quiet." Lena agreed, her tone grim. "He's a snake," she said. "Watch for the bite." Maya hung up, her eyes scanning the horizon, the weight of the fight settling on her shoulders. James was free, Eleanor was alive, but the air felt charged, a storm brewing, beyond her sight. James traced Eleanor's knuckles with his thumb, her smile fading as sleep took her, his own exhaustion pulling at him. He'd survived the cell, the beating, the lies, and now he sat here, a battered warrior with a moment of peace. But as the hospice room darkened, a shadow lingered in his mind. Victor's name a whisper of dread. The cheers outside, the triumph, online, felt fragile, a glass shield ready to shatter. He gripped his cane, his resolve hardening. Whatever came next, he'd face it. For Eleanor, for himself, for every fight he'd ever won. James Carter sat beside his sister Eleanor's hospice bed, the soft beep of her heart monitor a steady pulse in the dim Seattle room. His bloodied suit hung loose on his frame, his cracked glasses perched on his nose, his cane resting against the chair, its wood scratched from days of chaos. Eleanor's hand lay fragile in his, her skin cool but alive, her faint breaths a lifeline after the hell he'd endured. He'd been with her for hours, the morning sun climbing outside, filtering through blinds in golden slats across the floor. His ribs ached from Reed's baton, his wrists bore the marks of cuffs, but her weak smile dulled the pain. A quiet victory after Boise, the jetway, the cell. He leaned back, his gray eyes softening, believing the storm had passed. Victor Grayson's, suspension a lock on the nightmare's door. He murmured stories of their youth, her occasional nod a treasure, unaware of the inferno tearing through his life 1,500 miles away. The plane back to Atlanta hummed at 30,000 feet, a red-eye flight Maya had booked to get him home after Eleanor stabilized. James sat in first class again, seat 3A, the leather cool against his battered body, a blanket draped over his lap by a gentle attendant. His cane rested beside him, his travel bag tucked under the seat, its contents sparse but precious, a photo of Eleanor slipped inside. Passengers slept around him, the cabin dark save for the glow of a few screens, the engines a low roar beneath the silence. He sipped water, the plastic cup trembling in his hand, his mind drifting to the crowd's cheers. Maya's embrace, the moment he'd thought he'd won. The flight felt like a bridge, a return to normalcy, his Atlanta home waiting with its familiar creaks and memories. But as the plane crossed the Rockies, a call crackled through the cockpit, shattering that illusion. In Atlanta, Dixon, Victor's thug, had struck at dusk, the flames he'd set now a roaring beast consuming James's ranch house. The modest home, 40 years of his life, collapsed under the fire's weight, its wooden walls blackening, windows shattering in bursts of glass. Neighbors gathered on the street, their faces lit by the blaze, shouting for help as sirens wailed. In the distance, Dixon had vanished, leaving a forged insurance claim in the mailbox, its edges curling from the heat. A lie claiming James had torched his own home for cash. Firefighters battled the inferno, hoses blasting water into the night, but the structure buckled, the roof caving in with a groan that echoed through the quiet suburb. By morning, it was ash, a smoldering ruin steaming under the Georgia sun, the claim fluttering free as a cop retrieved it, his eyes narrowing at the signature. The captain's voice broke through the plane's intercom, clipped and tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received urgent news for a passenger, James Carter. Please remain calm." James stirred, his heart lurching as the attendant approached, her face pale. "Sir," she whispered, leaning close. "There's been a fire. Your house in Atlanta. It's gone." His breath stopped, the cup slipping from his hand, water splashing across his lap. "Gone?" he rasped. "How?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "They didn't say, just that police need you on landing." James clutched his cane, his knuckles whitening, the word Victor searing his mind. This wasn't chance. Not after everything. A calculated strike to rip away his roots. Passengers murmured, their eyes darting to him, but he stared ahead, his chest tight, the fragile piece of Eleanor's bedside incinerated. Victor Grayson sat in a seedy Atlanta motel, his suspension forcing him underground, a burner phone glowing in his thick hand. Dixon's video of the fire played on loop, the flames a dance of triumph, his dark grin widening with each crash of timber. The airline board had cut him loose, Laura's second firing a footnote. But this was power, a blow James couldn't dodge. He'd watched the news twist, the insurance claim leaking fast, headlines now screaming, civil rights icon burns. Own home? He chuckled, sipping cheap bourbon from a plastic cup, his empire cracked but his will intact. Reed waited in Seattle, warrant primed, ready to snag James the moment he landed, the arson frame a perfect trap. Victor tossed the phone, aside, his eyes glinting. Suspension be damned, he'd finish this. The plane touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson, the wheels jolting against the tarmac, jarring James from his stupor. He stood, his cane trembling, and shuffled to the exit, the attendant's pitying glance burning into him. The jetway loomed, A repeat of Seattle's nightmare, and as he stepped into the terminal, cops swarmed, their boots pounding, voices sharp. "James Carter," one shouted. "You're under arrest, insurance fraud and arson." His stomach dropped, his voice rising. "That's my home," he said. "I didn't burn it." They grabbed him, cuffs snapping tight, his cane yanked away again, his knees buckling as they dragged him forward. Passengers gasped, some recognizing him, others filming. The chaos, a cruel echo of days past. Maya's phone lit up in Seattle, a news alert flashing the fire, her scream muffled by her hand. She'd stayed with Eleanor, guarding her uncle's peace, but this ripped it apart. She called Lena, her voice breaking. "They've burned his house," she said, framed him again. "He's arrested in Atlanta." Lena's reply was steel. "I'm flying down," she said. "We'll hit back harder." But Maya's hackers traced Dixon's burner to Victor, the arson's architect unmasked, though he'd vanished, a ghost in the wind. Laura surfaced on a cable news show, her face powdered, her smirk subtle. "James planned it all," she said. "Played. The victim for sympathy, I saw his temper." The lie spread, her reinstatement a distant dream but her spite alive, fanning Victor's flames. James sat in an Atlanta cell, the bars familiar now, his cane gone, his suit a tattered shroud. His ribs screamed, his glasses useless, but his spirit wavered. The loss of his home a dagger deeper than Reed's blows. 40 years, photos of his late wife, case files from civil rights victories, all ash. He pressed his forehead to the wall, his breath hitching, Eleanor's face his only anchor. Trial loomed, a fraud charge that could lock him away for life. Victor's revenge a vice tightening around him. He'd thought Seattle was the end, thought Maya's leaks had won. But this was worse, a personal annihilation stripping him bare. Victor hid in the motel, his bourbon bottle half empty, his grin fading as Maya's team pushed back online. The real Jetway video trended again, countering Laura's lies. But the arson claim held. Cops bought it, the system blind to truth. He'd lost the airline, lost Laura's job. But this fire was his masterpiece, a wound James couldn't heal. Reed texted, "Carter's locked up tight, trials fast-tracked." Victor nodded, his thick fingers drumming the table. One more push, he thought, and the old man's done. But as sirens wailed in the distance, a flicker of unease stirred, Maya's shadow looming larger than he'd planned. James curled his hands into fists, his nails digging into his palms, the cell's chill, sinking into his bones. He'd lost his home, his freedom again, his sister's time ticking away in Seattle. The crowd's cheers, the online support, felt hollow now, drowned by Victor's relentless hate. His spirit teetered, a thread from snapping. But he whispered, to himself, "I fought worse," a mantra to hold the dark at bay. Maya would come, Lena would fight, but this blow cut deeper, a wound to his soul. He leaned back, his head thudding against the wall, and waited, the fire's smoke still burning. In his mind, James Carter sat shackled in an Atlanta courtroom, the wooden bench hard against his bruised frame, his blood-stained suit replaced by a faded orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his gaunt body. His cracked glasses rested crooked on his nose, his cane confiscated again, leaving his hands trembling as they gripped the table's edge. The room buzzed with tension, the gallery packed with reporters, protesters, and gawkers, their whispers a low roar under the fluorescent lights. 3 days had passed since his arrest at the airport, the arson charge of his burned home fast-tracked to trial by Victor Grayson's unseen hand. His ribs ached from Reed's beating, his chest tight from missing meds, but his gray eyes burned. With a quiet fury, a lifetime of resilience steeling him for this moment. He'd lost his house, his freedom, nearly his sister. Yet here he stood, ready to fight one last time. The prosecution strutted in, a slick attorney named Carver with a shark's grin, his suit tailored sharp, his briefcase stuffed with Victor's lies. He laid out the case with relish, waving the forged insurance claim pulled from the ashes, its ink smudged but damning. James Carter torched his own home, Carver said, voice booming, a desperate bid for cash after a lifetime of playing the victim. He pointed at James, his sneer cutting through the room. "This man's no hero, he's a fraud." The gallery murmured, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably, the doctored jetway video still lingering in their minds. James clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, the accusation a fresh wound atop a dozen others. He glanced at the defense table, where Lena Hayes sat, her navy blazer crisp, her eyes locked on Carver like a hawk sizing prey. Maya Carter hunched in the front row, her black coat shed, her fingers flying across a laptop as her hackers worked in real time. She'd spent sleepless nights since the fire, her team cracking Victor's burner phones, tracing Dixon's calls, unearthing audio of Victor ordering the arson. Her dark eyes flicked to James, her heart twisting at his frail form. The man who'd raised her after her parents died, now caged by a monster she'd failed to stop. Lena rose, her voice steady, as she addressed the judge, a stern woman named Torres with silver hair and a no-nonsense stare. "Your Honor," she said, "we've got evidence this charge is a fabrication, a conspiracy led by Victor Grayson." Carver scoffed, but Torres raised a hand, her gaze narrowing. "Show me," she said. "I'll hear it." The courtroom screen flickered to life, Maya's hackers crashing the system with a live stream, their faces masked but their work precise. Audio blared, Victor's gravelly voice unmistakable. "Burn Carter's house. Plant the claim. Make it stick." Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously, the truth slicing through Carver's narrative like a blade. Lena piled on, presenting phone logs, bank transfers to Dixon, emails tying Victor to Reed and Judge Pierce. "This is a vendetta," she said, pointing at James, a man targeted for his race, his courage, his refusal to bow. James sat taller, his chest swelling despite the pain, her words a lifeline pulling him from despair. Carver scrambled, his polish cracking, stammering about chain of custody, but the audio's clarity drowned him out. Torres leaned forward, her eyes flicking to James, then to the gallery, where Laura Hensley sat, her face pale, her smirk gone. She'd slipped in, banking on Victor's win, her news appearance fueling the fraud lie. But now she shrank, the spotlight turning. Lena called her to the stand, her heels clicking reluctantly as she swore in, her voice trembling. "Did you lie about James assaulting you?" Lena asked, her tone a whip. Laura faltered. I was pressured," she muttered. "Victor told me to." The gallery erupted, Torres banging her gavel, silence settling as Laura's confession hung heavy, her reinstatement a mirage shattered by truth. James took the stand next, his shackles clinking as he limped forward, his voice low but resonant, filling the room with decades of weight. "I've fought injustice my whole life," he said. "Segregation, false arrests, beatings in alleys. And now, this. A man burning my home, framing me because I dared sit in first class." His eyes swept the jury, 12 faces riveted, some tearing up, others nodding. "I lost 40 years of memories," he said. "My wife's photos, my cases, but I won't lose my name." He spoke of Eleanor, her hospice bed, the flight meant to reach, her, his words a quiet thunder shaking the room. The jury sat still, the gallery hushed, his strength a beacon piercing Victor's lies. Torres called a recess, her face unreadable as she vanished to chambers, the courtroom buzzing as James returned to his seat, Lena's hand on his shoulder. Maya leaned over, whispering, "You were incredible, Uncle James. We've got him." He nodded, his breath ragged, hope flickering after days of ash. But across town, Victor hid in his motel, the live stream blaring from a cracked TV, his thick hands smashing the bourbon bottle against the wall, glass shattering like his plan. He roared, pacing the stained carpet, his empire dust, Laura's betrayal a sting he hadn't seen coming. He grabbed his burner, texting Reed, "Get out, it's over." But Reed didn't reply, already gone, leaving Victor alone. The jury filed, back, their faces solemn, the foreman standing with a paper trembling in his grip. "Not guilty," he said, the words a hammer breaking Victor's chains. Cheers erupted, Maya leaping up, tears streaming as she hugged Lena, James exhaling a sob, his head bowing. Torres banged her gavel, ordering silence, then turned to Carver. "Where's Grayson?" she demanded. "This court wants him." A bailiff stepped forward. Victor's been spotted, arrested mid-escape at a bus station fleeing with a fake ID. The gallery gasped, James lifting his eyes, a weight lifting as Victor's fall landed hard. Laura slunk out, her career ashes, her lies exposed, the news cameras now her hunters. James stood as the cuffs came off, his legs shaky but his spine straight, the jumpsuit swapped for a spare suit Lena brought, its gray fabric a shadow of his old dignity. He gripped his cane, returned at last, and walked free, the crowd parting, their applause a wave carrying him out. Victor sat in cuffs miles away, his motel hideout raided, his burner seized, his dark grin gone, replaced by a scowl as cops read his rights. The airline crumbled under lawsuits, its board resigning, Laura's face plastered online as a villain unmasked. James stepped into the sunlight, Maya at his side, believing the war was won, the enemy vanquished. But as he reached the car, a clerk handed him a sealed envelope, slipped from Victor's cell before the arrest, its edges worn, his name scrawled in thick ink. James tore it open, his breath catching at the words inside. Check your sister's hospice bill, a cryptic jab that chilled his blood. He clutched the note, his cane trembling, Victor's final play a shadow he couldn't shake. The victory felt hollow, a trap still ticking, but he squared his shoulders, his voice firm. Take me to Eleanor, he told Maya. I need to see her now. She nodded, her eyes narrowing. The fight not over. The note a thread to unravel. James slid into the car, the courthouse fading behind, his heart heavy but unbroken. He'd faced the fire, the cell, the lies, and stood tall, his name cleared, his spirit aflame Victor couldn't douse. But the note burned in his pocket, a whisper of dread, a hint that this wasn't the end. He'd won the battle, reclaimed his truth. But as Atlanta's skyline loomed, he braced for one last blow, a warrior ready, always ready. James Carter stepped out of the car at the Seattle hospice, the late afternoon sun dipping low, casting a warm glow over the brick building where his sister Eleanor lay. His gray suit, a spare from Lena Hayes, hung slightly loose on his battered frame, his cane tapping a slow rhythm against the pavement, his cracked glasses slipping down his nose. The courtroom victory in Atlanta still hummed in his veins, Victor Grayson's arrest a weight lifted, the cheers of the crowd a shield against days of hell. But the envelope from Victor slipped from his cell, burned in his pocket, its cryptic words, check your sister's hospice bill, gnawing at his gut. He'd flown back with Maya, the short flight a blur, his mind locked on Eleanor, needing her alive, needing this wind to hold. He pushed through the glass doors, the antiseptic smell sharp, his breath quickening as he moved toward her room. Maya followed close, her black coat shed, her dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her phone silent after days of battle. She'd watched James reclaim his name, seen Victor cuffed, but the note had rattled her, a final jab from a man who'd burned everything else. She gripped her laptop bag, her hackers on standby, ready to dig into whatever Victor's words hid. The hospice hall stretched quiet, nurses nodding as James passed, his presence a familiar ache after his brief visit days ago. He reached Eleanor's door, number 214, and paused, his hand trembling on the knob. She's here, he told himself. She has to be. He turned it, stepping inside, the soft beep of her heart monitor a lifeline he clung to. But the bed lay empty, sheets crisp and untouched, the monitor dark, its wires coiled neatly on a stand. James froze, his cane slipping slightly, his voice a rasp. Where is she? A nurse, a young woman with tired eyes, stepped in behind him, her clipboard clutched tight. Mr. Carter, she said, her tone soft but heavy. Eleanor passed this morning, during your trial. We tried to reach you, but... She trailed off, her gaze dropping. James's knees buckled, Maya catching his arm, her breath hitching as he sank into a chair, the cane clattering to the floor. Passed? He whispered. How? The nurse hesitated, flipping her clipboard. Natural causes, she said. Heart failure. It was quick. James shook his head, his chest caving, tears blurring his cracked lenses. No, he said. Not now. Not after everything. Maya knelt beside him, her hand on his. but her eyes flicked to the envelope, suspicion flaring. Victor, she thought. This isn't coincidence. James pulled the note from his pocket, his fingers shaking as he handed it to Maya. Check your sister's hospice bill, he read aloud, his voice breaking. What did he mean? Maya tore it open again, her mind racing, and grabbed her laptop, plugging into the hospice's network with a cable from her bag. Her hackers had taught her tricks, back doors, into systems, and she sliced through their records, pulling up Eleanor's file. Payments, meds, vitals. She scanned it all, her breath catching as she hit a line buried deep. Extra morphine doses, she said, unauthorized, 3 times the norm, starting 2 days ago. James lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. Morphine? He asked. She didn't need that. Her heart was weak, not her pain. Maya dug further, her fingers flying, unearthing a staff log. Order came from a burner number, she said, traced to Atlanta, Victor's motel. The truth crashed over them, a wave of ice and fire. Victor had bribed a hospice worker, a desperate orderly with debts, to overdose Eleanor, hastening her death. Under the guise of natural failure, his final undetectable revenge. James's hands curled into fists, his nails cutting into his palms, a sob tearing from his throat. He killed her, he said. That bastard killed my sister. Maya's face hardened, her voice steel. He wanted you to lose everything, she said. The house, your freedom, now her. James stood, his cane forgotten, his battered body trembling with rage. He'd beaten the trial, reclaimed his name, but this was a wound deeper than fire or cuffs, a loss he couldn't fight in court. Maya called Lena, her voice low and urgent. Victor murdered Eleanor, she said. Morphine overdose, covered as natural, we've got proof. Lena's reply crackled through, grim but resolute. I'm notifying Seattle PD, she said. This is homicide. He's not slipping this. Maya hung up, her hackers pushing the hospice logs online, the burners linked to Victor trending within minutes. Victor kills, a hashtag igniting fury. The airline collapsed under the weight, lawsuits piling from passengers, staff, James's case the spark that torched it all. Laura Hensley's hotel room in Boise swarmed with reporters, her face viral again, her lies a footnote to Victor's evil, her life imploding as she fled, unrecognizable under a hood. James stumbled to the hospice window, staring at the fading sun, Eleanor's absence of void swallowing him. He'd survived Boise, Reed's fists, the fire, the trial, but this victory was ash. Her death a price he hadn't seen coming. Maya stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her silence a shared grief. We'll get him, she said. He's in custody. This ends him. James nodded, his voice a whisper. It's not enough, he said. She's gone. But as the sun dipped, his resolve shifted, a new fire kindling. He'd lost her, lost his home, but he could still fight, could still speak. He turned to Maya, his eyes clear despite the tears. Get me a platform, he said. I need to tell the world. Hours later, James stood outside the hospice, a makeshift podium before a swelling crowd, cameras flashing, phones live streaming his words. His gray suit hung loose, his cane steady in his grip, his voice raw but powerful, cutting through the dusk. I'm James Carter, he said, 72, a lawyer who fought for rights, a man who sat in first class and paid with everything. He spoke of the flight, Laura's prejudice, Victor's vendetta, the fire, the frame-ups, and now Eleanor's murder. His words a blade carving truth into the air. They beat me, burned my home, killed my sister, he said, because I wouldn't bow, because my skin made me a target. The crowd roared, fists raised, tears streaming, his pain a mirror to theirs. He held up the hospice log, Maya's printout trembling, in his hand. This is systemic, he said. Not one man, but a world that lets him thrive, that turns seats into wars, homes into ash, lives into pawns. I've lost all I had, but I'm still here, and I'll fight this till my last breath. His voice broke, but he stood tall, a battered warrior, his speech viral before he finished. Millions watching, sharing, raging. Victor sat in an Atlanta cell, the live stream blaring from a guard's phone, his thick hands cuffed, his dark eyes wide as James's words buried him deeper than bars could. The note had been his checkmate, but James turned it into a rallying cry, a legacy Victor couldn't touch. Maya guided James back to the car, his steps slow, his body spent, but his spirit aflame unquenched. The airline's collapse hit the news, executives fleeing, Laura a pariah, Victor's trial looming with murder added to his list. James buried Eleanor the next day, her grave simple, her memory his fuel, the crowd from his speech swelling at the cemetery, their support a wall against his grief. He stood over her, his cane sinking into the earth, whispering, "I kept fighting, Elle, for you." Justice was his, Victor's fall complete, but the cost hollowed him, her loss a scar no verdict could heal. He climbed into the car, Maya at the wheel, her eyes fierce with pride. "Where to?" she asked. "Home," he said, then paused. No home left, just forward. She nodded, driving into the night, the city lights blurring past, his speech echoing online, a call to dismantle the systems that birthed Victor. He'd won, cleared his name, toppled an empire, but the bittersweet taste lingered. Eleanor's absence a weight he'd carry forever. His cane rested beside him, his glasses fogged with quiet tears, but his jaw set firm. The war was over, the trap sprung, yet his fight stretched on, a vow to the sister he'd lost, to the world he'd reshape. James Carter's journey and flight attendant kicks black elderly man off plane 5 minutes later. She's fired in front of everyone, reveals profound lessons about resilience, systemic racism, and the cost of justice. First, it underscores the enduring strength of the human spirit. James, a 72-year-old civil rights lawyer, faced relentless attacks, humiliation, false arrests, a burned home, and his sister's murder. Yet he stood firm, turning pain into a powerful stand against injustice. His story teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to fight through it. Second, it exposes how deeply racism can embed itself in systems, from Laura Hensley's snap judgment to Victor Grayson's vendetta, showing how prejudice festers when unchecked power thrives. It's a stark reminder that silence enables oppression, and vigilance is vital to dismantle it. Third, the tale highlights the bittersweet nature of justice. James cleared his name, toppled an airline, and saw Victor fall. But Eleanor's loss left a void no victory could fill, teaching us that triumph often comes with scars. This story urges us to confront injustice head-on, to question assumptions, and to amplify the voiceless. It's a call to recognize the battles beneath the surface and act before they claim more than we can bear. So, what do you take from James's fight? How would you stand against a system rigged to break you? Drop your thoughts in the comments with a 1 if you'd fight like James. Hit like if this moved you, subscribe for more real-life sagas, and share to spark change. Thanks for joining this journey. May you find strength to challenge the shadows in your own world and peace in the victories, however hard won they may be.